Welcome, everyone, to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast 1991 Retrospective, where we cover albums that are turning 30 in the year of our Lord 2021. And we are going to review the most significant ones. And this week, we kind of came off the tail of our little grunge wave of 1991. Big movement, big and important last week. So if you haven't seen those videos, go check them out. But we're going into a very different scene here, transitioning right into the world, the blooming hip-hop movement in 1991 with, of course, the gigantic, monolithic low-end theory by A Tribe Called Quest.
Yes, and even though we're transitioning away from our little grunge moment that we've had over the past few weeks, this also being an album released, as many people of you will know, on the same day as Nirvana's Nevermind, this is also kind of a sequel of sorts, or like a sister video of sorts to an earlier video in our retrospective, that being our video on De La Soul's De La Soul is Dead, because of course De La Soul and A Tribe Called Quest came up in the same scene, but more than that, we're a part of the same sort of broader collective of artists known as the Native Tongues. And though they don't feature on this record, De La Soul are mentioned, and a lot of their other Native Tongues companions are mentioned on this record. Some of them are even a part of this record, have features on this record. So in terms of hip hop and the shift in the early 90s as the kind of golden age of hip hop gave way to a more diversified world in terms of sound, in terms of scenes, and that sort of thing, acts like De La Soul and particularly A Tribe Called Quest came to the fore and came to represent a kind of image of the East Coast, of an East Coast alternative to like gangster rap and all the sorts of other things that were happening as well. But also like a particular alternative within the East Coast of this sort of jazzier, more sort of soulful, less kind of, I suppose, hard hitting and more sort of moody and vibey. I hate to use that word, but it's something that the Tribe themselves invoke on this album. And Low End Theory is kind of like the sort of totemic example of that sound at its most sort of elemental. Like in many ways, it's a sort of fixture record that is quite a powerful and potent reference point for a lot of the music that would follow. We talked in our De La Soul video about the, I guess, cutting edge of production at this particular time, the way in which Prince Paul and De La Soul was innovating with his use of unconventional samples and creative sample sources and the ways that they're integrated. And Tribe Called Quest, of course, are no exception. Their flavor is a little bit different. They're not as like esoterically bombastic and weird, and they're sort of sampling, specifically that of Ali Shaheed Muhammad, the group's sort of main sort of production voice. Their samples are slightly more, I guess, pared back, simplistic, very much focused on establishing a particular atmosphere and never once yanking the listener out of that. And that, I think, is the distinct appeal of the Low End Theory and why it's kind of come to be known as a sort of seminal text in this sort of wave of hip hop, if you like, because it sort of lays the groundwork that a lot of hip hop, both within this wave and in generations to come, would build off of when we think of like jazz rap, for instance. I mean, for the song We've Got Jazz on this record feels almost like a kind of mission statement for that vision of how hip hop could sound and the type of characters and playful attitudes that hip hop artists and rappers and MCs and groups could do, building off of what the groundwork that had been laid throughout the 80s. And so that brings us to the Low End Theory. And for many people, I think this album is, if not an outright introduction, then at least one of the first records I think a lot of people hear when they're getting into hip hop. It tends to be quite a foundational record because it eases you into a lot of what this world is all about without being too confronting or weird or strange or all over the place. It's very sort of, as I say, elemental. The rapping of Q-Tip and Fife Dog is not particularly technically wowing or innovative. They are great at flows and wordplay and that sort of thing, but they also have somewhat of a rudimentary style, I would say, compared to some of their fellow artists that your mileage may vary with it, and I'll get into my personal feelings a bit later on, but there's no denying this is a really important and beloved record, and deservingly so. And I'm really curious to hear what you guys all think of it and what it means to you.
This was definitely a sort of gateway album into the genre of hip hop for me. I have a lot of, besides the fact that it's a classic, I have a lot of fond personal associations with this myself. I think the things that really drew me in about it were just how, I think elemental is a great word to describe it. All the instrumentation feels, or at least is meant to feel, very natural, and it's sort of it's very inviting in that sense, because it's always fun, but it's also very sort of mellow while never being unexciting in its own way. Is it basically what I think I'm getting at is when you is this album feels like you rolling yourself just a big old fucking doobie, because it's just such an interesting experience, especially for someone who, um, as you can tell from the everything about me, did not grow up listening to hip hop.
Well, like the most things that are foundational for Morgan, of course, it was also foundational for me by proxy. I had definitely listened to a lot more hip hop when Morgan recommended this to me when he was really getting into it. And it's funny just because like I've gone on record multiple times saying that like 90s hip hop is like a lot of it just feels like it's designed against me, in the sense that it's like you're right in the middle of the CD era where they're encouraging their records to be as big as Maximal with their track lengths and skits and just like being super unwieldy. And and I just sometimes, since I was more acquainted with more modern hip hop in the 2010s, I was just a bit more acclimatized to things that had a few more bells and whistles. And when I was really getting into music, some of the first stuff that I listened to was shit like Mad Villainy, which obviously takes a whole lot of like this album is the blueprint for that. But in Mad Villainy, that's like such a colorful album that has like, Madlib going stupid hard, and you have one of the most interesting MCs to have ever done it. And it's got such a defined identity that it feels almost totally separate from this. It's because, again, it's building upon that foundation. So when I went back to it, I was at first a little bit worried that I would view it like I would albums that I think are good, like, Enter the Wu-Tang or Liquid Swords, where it's like they're good, but they always have a ceiling with me. And that sometimes the bars I just don't think have aged particularly well, and sometimes the flows just feel a little bit more stilted because once trap became part of the main hip hop scene, I feel like the sort of smoother and occasionally like psychedelic sound kind of complements flows that are just a little bit easier to digest. So I couldn't really acclimatize my ears to the slightly more jagged, I guess, ways of delivery. So I think that this is sort of a standout in this decade for me because it manages to take everything I love and, of course, be really elemental about it. The draw for me has always been with Tribe in general, has, of course, been the production, I think, which is really like dark and nocturnal. It's got that sort of, it's called the low end theory, which is, a double meaning based on, the low end, the musical low end, things like bass, which, heavily features on every single beat on here. It's a lot of the same kind of taking that elemental beat structure and, switching it up in many ways as you possibly can to allow the MCs in question to ride it as best they can. And it's sort of like also a statement on where Black men were in society then. And, the double meaning, not a stranger to a device employed by all members of Tribe at any given time. And I think what strikes me about it the most is the confidence. I won't, come out here and say that I think this is a perfect album, because I don't think that. However, I'm just really, really fond of it. And Whereas some of the stumbling blocks for other 90s hip hop for me are things that I can't get over. This is an album that's kind of like the Beastie Boys Balls Boutique for me, where, obviously the production's not as adventurous, but it's more or less the charisma and the spirit, the enthusiasm, the raw technical like talent. Like, yeah, it's not flashy, but it's also just, these people clearly know what they're doing and they are working within a very specific skill set, and they're doing what they can. They're being as maximal as what they can with like a minimal amount of building blocks. And it's not as venturous as something like that, but it makes up for it in charm, where sometimes maybe every bar feels a little bit too like, there are some things on here like I could see bars like drink a lot of soda, so they call me Dr. Pepper, to be a bit like, oh wow, that's fucking sure, man, cool. But like, I don't know, I feel like maybe it's could be my like love of everything they did after this too, to be coloring that, of me just viewing that as being more I guess the product of very, very enthusiastic it's kind of like when Morgan talked about the Metallica album Kill 'Em All, where it's just there's such a youth and vitality here that even the lesser skilled and experienced parts of it hold that youthful charm that just can't be found on albums that have this like insanely untouchable mastery with all of them. And I feel like that's definitely them for this. It wasn't their first project, of course, but it feels like this was definitely the arrival for Tribe. And as such, I think it's like the ideal hip hop album in that it gives you a great idea of the personalities behind it, all of the rappers and what they're good at and what they focus on and what you like about them and what the band's just sort of goal is. I mean, like even just right out of the gate with Excursions, that's like a mission statement for the album and for Tribe. And this is an album that's meant to be built upon in the future. It's an album you can come back to because it has really, really distinct strengths, and all of it is, as you said, very elemental, but it's also something that allows you to appreciate where they would go from here with all of the distinct differences in records like Beats, Rhymes, and Life and Midnight Marauders. So no shock, but I really do love this album, even if I don't think it's quite perfect, but I almost think that its imperfections largely, for the most part, are also kind of, in a weird way, things that make it more appealing to me.
Yeah, I think the big keyword there in terms of the fucking, I went to the hat store today and I bought myself a hat type of rhymes. I like.
Yes.
It's just immensely charming to me.
I agree.
And it makes for
it just makes me laugh, man. Like, I don't know.
And like it's just fun, and it doesn't take itself seriously, and I have a nice time with it.
For lack of a better word, it is also just, it's got a great fucking vibe to it. That sort of nocturnal jazz thing that it has going on is just, it's basic, it's not complicated, it's not deep, it's not dense. Listen,
thank God for my reefer, man. That shit good.
Like listening to it still, like it's just like, even without Under the Influence of Drugs, I have put this on, I'll listen to it alone in my bed, or it's just a great album to like do things to, because that sense of rhythm there is so strong with all of the deliveries, with all the beats. It's an album that feels kinetic, even though none of it is really like energized and fast. It's like you really feel all of the parts, the active moving parts of every song. You just really feel hyper aware of them almost. It's like everything about it is very easy to appreciate. And, I got to respect that.
The way that I kind of think about it is like, this album is for, I guess, people who are getting into rap music, what something like In a Silent Way is for people who are getting into jazz. Like, even though that album is like incredibly like harmonically and chordally complex, it still presents itself in this very kind of like straightforward, kind of down tempo, really sort of enveloping way that in comparison to a lot of the other sort of fusion landmarks around it, makes for
Kind
a really...
of Blue also is a little bit more of a traditional, like, you
can use that for the modal side of jazz as well. Like there's a lot of complexity and denseness if you want to dive into that, but if you don't want to dive into that, if you just want to experience it, it's also not terribly confronting. What I will say
Yeah.
about A Tribe Called Quest, just to lead off, but I'll go into August in a second because I want to hear what he has to say. But the way I kind of think about this record is that it offers you a lot of the same sorts of surface pleasures as those records do. It even does offer you some deeper pleasures when you dive into certain aspects of it as well. And I think it does a reasonably strong job of being diverse within that certain realm without ever sort of deviating from its kind of core aesthetic. But it also has a certain ceiling within that certain other Tribe records that I like a bit more don't quite have. But I have more specific thoughts than that I'll get into as the video goes on. August, what do you think of this record?
You're a newbie to this, I believe.
Yeah. This was my first Tribe record. So I guess what strikes me about it in a lot of stark contrast is that it is very much it does definitely come from that old school of hip hop where the lyrics are very immediate, very direct. You don't, in general, I'd say you don't have to do a lot of legwork to figure out the deeper points being made here, the deeper implications. But if you're willing to put in that legwork, it is quite compelling and interesting at points. But it's a very well produced album. I think the beats here are exceptional. I guess just that's kind of my general thing, is that a lot of it is very good, but there are also plenty of times in the track list where I think there are some quite notable misses in the track list, a couple of which are quite apparent, but we will.
I don't worry, I plan to get into them, but you can obviously leave that off if you want to.
No, but we can. That I think we should save those for later. Bookend them to emphasize the good here.
I mean, there's so many classic songs on this, to be fair.
And then harp on the negatives a little later down the line. Because oh boy, there are a couple of infamous moments here.
Look, the thing I love about this record is that yes, it provides this perfect atmosphere for mellowing out and chilling and sort of switching your brain off. And yes, it feels somewhat condescending to call it this, and I didn't want to necessarily do it, but it is like a kind of entry level sort of thing. But it's also like a lot of the great sort of classics and most significant records of any particular niche could be described that way. And that doesn't necessarily mean they don't have plenty under the surface to lock into. And my sort of strange, I guess, discovery or realization coming back to this and really like kind of studying it for the purposes of wanting to get into it this week is, I guess, how much I've changed as a person and my tastes have changed over the years since I first sort of experienced Tribe Called Quest and this record specifically as a teenager, when it did truly feel like quite revolutionary and strange and awesome. And now I listen to it and I think about certain aspects and ways that my personal tastes in hip hop in this era have developed to be more, I guess, partial to the more, I suppose, esoteric and daring and strange and less sort of coherent and consistent artists like De La Soul, for instance. And I know that that's probably one of the most stark ways in which Jake and I, for all of the similarities and often quite frequently similar takes that we share, that's probably the starkest point at which we differ is on our opinions in certain aspects of 90s hip hop. And that's fine. I think that just says a lot about the particular tastes that we have and the aesthetics and sounds that we like and stuff. But to give this record some credit, it introduces some of the most important figures, or not even, if not introduces, because obviously the second Tribe album, it kind of places in to their most focused several of the most important voices of their time. Q-Tip is obviously one of the most recognizable figures in 90s rap, and this is an album with a number of iconic songs that cannot be overlooked. I'm particularly fond of Verses from the Abstract, which famously features this fantastic bass playing from the legendary jazz bassist Ron Carter. I love the whole framing of this song, which is kind of like Q kind of acts like it's a studio live session that he's emceeing, where he like introduces all of the players and then introduces like extended family in the musical world who aren't even on the song as well, including their native tongues, friends, and associates. The sampling here, I mean, I should be said that Ali Shaheed Muhammad handles most of the production, but the beats themselves are Q all the way. He is fantastic. I mean, his beat construction and sampling and work alongside Ali, their work together and constructing the musical landscape of this is utterly seminal and deserving of basically all the praise you want to heap onto it. I mean, the worst you could ever say about any of these tracks musically is that some of them sound a bit samey, but like that thing that they sound samey to is something that's so like organically gorgeous and so refreshing at this particular point in history that it's very difficult to complain about that aspect of it. The cool, smooth tone that this record has consistently is never sacrificed, even when aspects of certain tracks musically explore different sort of colors and shades of samples and stuff. Show Business, the song after Verses from the Abstract, is also fantastic, in my opinion. I love the rock steady drum break that's sampled on this track. It's so hard hitting, so iconic. And I mean, the drum break samples in general across this record are fantastic. And it's such an easy little thing to overlook, especially when with that title, Low in Theory, we think about the groove and the bass and the kind of stomach of these songs, for lack of a better word. But those drums are so canonical, and the ways in which they're sampled and used is so just satisfying on a really elemental level. Obviously, the album opens in pretty iconic fashion as well with Excursions, which is basically this mission statement sort of thing that lays out at its most refined the sonic approach of the band and the style that Q has developed at this point. That Art Blakey sample on this track is iconic. It's a really just invigorating statement of purpose and benefits from Q-Tip just being himself and really taking over the mic and really domineering this track.
Yeah, I mean, just that opening 1-2 punch is just like, if you didn't like hip hop before, you do now. It's not, you can't. There you go.
Bugging Out is so fucking good, man. I love this song.
Yeah, a great bass groove. Again, I'm going to be a broken record a little bit here, but great bass groove, great beat. If anything, just as iconic as Excursions. And what I love about these first two tracks is that they're kind of like track 1 is a showcase for Q-Tip and track 2 is a showcase for Fife Dog. And they are introduced to you in this kind of particular mode that they're in with these two separate tracks. And I think they're both two of the best performances that each of these rappers individually give on the whole record. Bugging Out in particular is just really catchy as well. Like I get the bugging out, and not even just that, but like
assassin with the roughneck business.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's so much charisma and just fun energy to these songs without sacrificing that cool, relaxing, smooth vibe as well. I'm really, really enamored with the way that this record opens. Although I do have to say, one of the reservations I have about this record is that, it's not that I don't care for Fife Dog generally, because as I've said, I think he's great on Bugging Out. I think he has a lot of really fun moments on this record. I think generally his more, I guess, troublemaking, goofy approach is kind of like a nice sort of partner in crime counterpoint to Q-Tip, who's more sort of laser focused. But also as a result of the, I guess, differences between the two of them, I find myself drawn far more frequently or compelled far more frequently by Q than by Fife. I think there's a bit of a gap between the two in terms of overall technical talent, which I understand is probably among the hip hop heads out there a very, bold and potentially controversial statement. And I mean no disrespect. Obviously, Fife's passing is tragic. But I do think that there are a lot of points on this record where when Fife is rapping, I'm less compelled, and sometimes, especially because I have sort of developed a taste for, I guess, suppose generally the more sort of technical side of rap performances, which is not to say that I don't value these performances. But for instance, my favorite Tribe record is their last record, We Got It From Here, Thank You For Your Service, a record where I think even Q-Tip has, who is, like I said, pretty good on this record, Low End Theory, developed astronomically by the time you get to that record, where he is, I think, giving the best performances of his whole career. Some of the most
Ramen noodle.
some of the most technical and incisive, and he's developed by such a huge margin by the time you get to that record, and it's so sort of laser focused. And so that, I guess, retroactively affects how I respond to certain parts of this record too. But in terms of Fife, like I said, he's great on Bugging Out. I do take issue with, well, not take issue with, but I'm less enthralled with a song like Butter, because I don't find him as engaging there. I'm not as interested in hearing about his romantic conquests, and that's not because I don't think he should be telling those stories. I think those kinds of tracks can be really fun. I just don't find him to be as thrilling a teller of them as, for instance, De La are on a song like Biddies in the BK Lounge from De La Soul Is Dead, which is a very similar song thematically and lyrically to Butter, and a song that I find much more exciting. That said, though, again, it's always like a double-edged sword, because this has one of my favorite samples on the record.
Okay, I was waiting with bated breath to just be like, but you got the beat though. Please mention the beat.
I'm getting there. The Weather Report sample on this track, that it's just fucking amazing. The general tone is great. Again, I can't be mad. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I guess I'll drop one more hot take and then kind of recede for a bit, or I don't know, let some of you talk about some of the songs that I've brought up. But I think one of the most overrated, or at least like a song that I don't love to the same extent as a lot of other people, is Check the Rhyme. And I hate to say that, because I know that's a really beloved song. It has some nice musical elements, but it isn't part of a record where I become particularly conscious of its sparseness. And this is the thing that I love. This record is at its best for me when it is providing you with this mellow groove and space to exist within without being too bombarded. That's the joy of this record. But there are parts of it, and Check the Rhyme is by no means the worst offender, but there are parts of it where it loses something, where it just gets a little bit too sparse, and to the point where some of that sumptuousness feels a bit lost. And I think Check the Rhyme is maybe one of these tracks. I also think that it's not one of the most compelling performances from either Q or Fife, although I do like, and I've always loved, the little back and forth thing they have. You on point, Fife? Yeah. All the time, Tip. Like that's a nice moment. I like that little detail. But yeah, these kinds of songs where it's all just about being a fly MC and clean your ears out and check the word, and it just has a ceiling for me. And I think that at other points in the record where there's a little more fulsomeness in what's happening musically, that's a little bit easier to overlook. But I fully expect to be ethered, if not by you, then by someone else for that. So yeah, I accept the punishment.
I mean, I guess, but like, I don't know, those distant horns on the beat on Check the Rhyme are just so fucking, it's such a great way to...
They come in, they're not in enough of the song, is my point. They come in at a certain point, that little horn refrain, and then it's gone, and it comes in again, I think, later on, and then it's gone again. And it's just like so much of the space in between, there's just not as much happening for me.
I love that about the track, honestly. It's the minimalism here is like one of the main draws. I just feel like it, sometimes it's like you can have beats like this that are really simple, really minimal, or like this, and they can mix like oil and water with the people. But however, I just think that like it's a real synthesis kind of deal where like it really is just a combination of the fact that I think that, I agree with you in the sense that I don't think like this is not Tribe at their best pen game. This is not them at their best even delivery game, but still is that it's kind of like the simplicity of the beats is reflective of their own simplicity. And when melded together, it sort of creates a, multiplying two negative numbers to get a positive number in, if I'm going to be really fucking weird and esoteric about it. But like, it's something that's very immediate to me that I really, really like and appreciate. And honestly, I feel like this is just the difference between our preferences in hip hop, because one thing that I'll mention about this being to its benefit is that none of these songs, to me anyway, outstay their welcome, is that they're all perfectly sized, structured, and timed to be, they're all within that like 3-4 minute range. That's just like perfect to be able to exercise these very, very simple beats. And it's like, and not to mention the record itself is so focused. It's so, not to say this in a bad way, but it's very basic in a sense. Whereas you have something like De La, which is like way more unwieldy, and it has all of these digressions and diversions, and it almost kind of feels like for me anyway, as somebody who doesn't get along with it like 100% anyway, is that it feels almost schizophrenic, and it feels like I really want them to focus on something, and this is like the antidote to that, where it's like it's shorter, it's more concise, it hits a bit harder, and with the lyricism, like I get it, but I don't. It's like, it's the exact same thing with like De La Soul, where it's like, I don't have any complaints with their lyricism ever. It's just that they sound kind of dated and silly just as often as Tribe do to me. And so as a result, like, I don't know, maybe it's just me being very, very nice on 90s hip hop lyrics. But to me anyway, it's like, they're both sets of people, not to keep belaboring this comparison, but it's, we already covered this album, so it's already there, and it's at the same time, so I think it's apt, especially because native tongues. But they both are full of great storytellers. Is that maybe on a bar by bar basis, I don't think that either group are like consistently dropping heat. It's really more the totality of what they're doing, and I'm just kind of like, I'm really in the moment, I'm really listening. It's like, this isn't really a passive listen for me, despite the fact that I call it like a vibey album. But it's still something that like I have to go in, and like there is kind of a ceiling for it. And I'll totally admit that, but it's a ceiling that I think every album from this era has. Like the Beastie Boys, even, who have albums that I like considerably more than even this, I have to do the same thing there. It's like, if you want me to listen to an album before the year 2005 that isn't made by Aesop Rock, my brain is mentally going to be like, okay, got to prepare for some corny ass shit. And it's there, and I just kind of enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I can't take that, nor do I even want to try and remotely take that away from you. I think a good thing to add in at this point is, which will serve as an extra detail to focus on about the album that's quite important to Tribe, and also a way of extrapolating this feeling that I have, and I think that probably August might share to a certain extent, is to talk about two of the more socially conscious songs on this record, one of which is one of the best on the album, and the other of which is probably the worst song on the album. And although I've seen people make cases for it, so it's fine. I'll start with the positive, because it's a song that I think is not really as talked about as much from the general discourse and reviews I've read of this album, but I think it's one of the peaks of like, not storytelling, well, I guess it is storytelling, but it's a little looser than that. But anyway, I'm talking about the song Everything Is Fair, which is a really sort of a song in which Tribe are making clear obviously they allude to the sort of social aspect of blackness and existing in, these sort of American big cities and environments with this particular cultural aspect and social strata and all those kinds of things. And what I love about Everything Is Fair is that it's kind of the story of this particular person, Miss Elaine, and the life that she leads and the things that she goes through and the things she experiences as a part of her normal life. And it's not this kind of like tragic story or like this whole thing where there's a lot of kind of twists and turns and narrative developments. Like there are things that happen to her that are positive and negative, and she has tough time and she's doing her best and all that sort of thing. But the song is not about kind of like pulling you in all these different directions. It's just about picturing this person's life and their existence and what that says about the wider existence of, you know, Black people in New York and in that environment in that time. And from that you get a lot, you can take a lot away. And I think that's quite, you know, strong and meaningful. Versus something like, you know, the infamous date rape, which is, you know, it's not like fundamentally awful. It's just kind of misguided and just misses the mark of what it's trying to do. And I think its intentions are noble.
No, I see what they're trying to do, and I get the point to what they're trying to do, but they shouldn't have done it.
The thing is, and this kind of encapsulates how I feel about Q and Fife in general, is that Q here has some like Serge Tankian-esque precision about like statistics of date rape and stuff, and actually like talking about, you know, it's not exactly, you know, a million levels of nuance or anything, but he seems to sort of understand the general social point that's being made and the idea of like, you know, consent and all that sort of stuff. And then Fife comes in.
I honest to God, Tyler, like I actually completely share your thoughts here, and it's mainly because Fife undermines the point of the song that, you know, obviously that Q-Tip was making, and like, you know, it's not particularly nuanced, but I still think when Q did it works. And then Fife comes on and basically just like, in my opinion, at least, it's like, I don't like dislike this song even. I think it's got a nice beat. And again, I think it's well-intentioned. And yeah, it's a hip hop album from the 90s. The politics are going to be iffy. That's also something that's just kind of bar for entry. But I think that the classic mistake here is that they are trying to be forward thinking, and they get a little bit of it there at the beginning. But basically they go wrong in that, like, Fife is way too focused on the male perspective and like trying to lend sympathy to it, and it just makes the water so muddied and so like this is not like, it's almost like he's trying to do like playing both sides almost, and you're just kind of like, all right, dude, I'm gonna need you to like. And also some of the, like, again, even for me, some of the bars here are just like, even if he was like completely in the right, like the bars about the crazy tender kitten, nope, let's just not do that on a song about date rape. Maybe
I get it, like Fife is trying to do the perspective of the man, like not necessarily to endorse it, but just to like display it. But it's so,
but
like,
in doing so, he kind of endorses it. Like,
and
you know what I
like,
mean?
Q's not even innocent either, because he's not as bad as that. But then towards the end of the song, like when he's like, when he does, like you've already kind of alluded to the kitten sort of thing, like, baby, 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 I don't want to be rude, but I know because of your bloody attitude, I know why you act that way.
Yeah.
It usually happens on the 28th day. I respect that crazily. When you're done with the pads, can you come check me? Like, come on, dude.
I mean,
Dan just found out about menstruation. That shit sucks.
I mean, literally fucking, you know what? This actually segues into something that I do think is important that we mention. I'm sure at least one of you know what I'm about to talk about. And that, like, you know, I already said 90s hip hop, not exactly like, even though it's a forward thinking genre, and obviously this is made by people who probably politically these days probably align themselves far more with us. But, you know, that's, you know, I hate to be all times were different, but like, it doesn't change anything. Times were in fact different. That said, at one point there was a song on this album, The Low End Theory, called, say it with me, kids, Georgie Porgy. And this song is, unlike the infamous date rape, there can be no arguments made for Georgie Porgy, because this song is just straight up homophobic, and like not even in a, oh, they don't understand, or oh, they're portraying. It's like, no, it's just like, hey, we, A Tribe Called Quest, Five Dog and Q-Tip, we hate gay people and you're going to hell. Oops. And the record label begged them to get it off of the album, and eventually they were successful. But it is important to note that that song was on here, and they really wanted it to stay here. So, unfortunate relic of the past.
Yeah, look, I want it to be clear that my, I guess, lack of total adoration for this record is not like my feelings about infamous date rape. I'm not using that as a kind of like sticking point to say, well, this album's not as good because they were. I know you don't, but like I want to make that clear to
Yeah,
our listeners. I like this record a lot. I have a lot of affection for it, and I haven't even talked about my 2 favorite songs on it yet. I've purposefully saved that to end on a positive note. But
Is one of them We've Got Jazz?
one of them is We've Got Jazz. Yes,
Yes, a
but
W.
We'll get to that. But yeah, I just certain aspects of it, like I do kind of take me out of the experience, and that is part of it. And I think that it is. Like this is really kind of Fife's proper Tribe debut on this record properly. And I think that he gets better on Midnight Marauders as well. I think I just generally think that in every respect, that record is a superior one to this one. Even though I acknowledge that, you know, it's not massively different. It's just, to me, I think, do what they're doing here in a slightly more developed and sophisticated and fascinating way, with a higher proportion of songs that I love and a lower proportion of songs that I don't care for as much. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to hold, you know, Georgie Porgy against this record, because it is an honor at the end of the day, and
thankfully,
and I don't see any point in holding against
but
something.
It's still indicative of the artist's attitude, and I feel like it still informs the record, like on songs like Infamous Date Rape. So it's still definitely important that we bring it up, just because, you know, they wouldn't. That's the thing with politics and music, especially old music, is that, you know, it's going to bother you as much as you let it. But at the same time, there's something to be said when you have an album like this that means a whole lot, this totemic cultural thing. And it's just like, does this thing perhaps embody some things that maybe weren't all that great about that time, as well as it does the obvious testament and achievement it is to the musicianship and the culture and everything. It's important in a 1991 retrospective to acknowledge all aspects of it.
Absolutely. Another thing I'll say as well, that I also contributes a little bit to my reticence with certain aspects of this record, is that there are times where they will nail a particular topic or a thing that they're going for beautifully in a certain song, but there'll be another song on the record that's kind of like a redundant reiteration of the same idea it's just been done better. And I think, like, for example, Vibes and Stuff, which is a decent song, I don't have anything really against it. It's kind of, again, an extension of the sort of mission statement sort of thing about what they're trying to do and where they come from and how those things are related, the vibe they're looking for and the culture that they're within. But like, you already did an amazing job of outlining those things on Excursions, and so Vibes and Stuff is kind of just here to extend the feel of the record. Now, that said, it's not as strong a critique as some of the other ones I've loved. It's still a decent track, but it is like, it feels a little bit like padding. And another instance of that as well is the song I've already talked about, Show Business, which I absolutely love, which is one of the songs on the record that more talks about their relationship with Jive Records and their sort of contentious relationship with labels and promoters and that sort of thing. That's a really great analysis and digging into those sorts of things, with great features from Brand Nubian and Diamond D. And then you have earlier on the record Rap Promoter, and it's kind of like, that song's all right too, but you would just go on to do this topical idea so much better and so much more substantively on Show Business for me. And so that's a bit of a nitty-gritty critique, I guess. But that's, I guess, something else that struck me while listening to it as well. But I mean, it's neither here nor there. They're all still like decent tracks. And yes, and there are a couple of other songs towards the end of the record that I think are a little bit, I would guess, inessential. Sky Pager is a particularly kind of baffling song to me. Maybe it's just that I don't quite get the significance of what they're going for. It does feature Ron Carter again, although he's just sampled on this track. And it's kind of like, I mean, instrumentally, the beat is kind of feels a little bit like, it's sort of one of those points of the record where the beat's just kind of a little bit like, okay, this is really cool, but we've had like, it's not really adding a new flavor in any way, which is fine. But also, like, I don't really dig into the significance of the pager in the way that Fife and Q do. It's just a little piece of, I guess, cultural, historical ephemera that has kind of just not aged particularly well. Because
another little thing kind of like that is all the references to the Arsenio Hall show,
Yeah.
which are particularly not dated in a poor way, but they're quite. They mention Arsenio Hall like 4 or 5 times on this album on separate songs, and it's just a kind of a strange fixation looking back on it.
I will say there is a reason for that. Well, simultaneously, first of all, didn't they reference Arsenio on De La?
They did.
They probably did.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's because I'm pretty sure that like in especially in that time period, it's like Arsenio was basically like the first person of color to actually have a talk show like that. So it was like kind of a cultural force thing. And like with Black musicians being able to like they were just obviously coming way more up in the mainstream. So I think that was just a part of the collective hip hop consciousness a lot more like poignantly than it was perhaps than it is now, obviously. But like it was like it's sort of like an important cultural thing that had happened. So I still think it's strange that they reference him so many times, though. That is kind of strange.
Yeah, no, I'm not knocking the
Yeah.
importance of Arsenio Hall. I definitely understand that was a big fixture of culture back then, particularly for people of color. It's just it doesn't it doesn't age as like pop culture references in hip hop and rock age in very strange ways, and I think it's always interesting to examine those.
And on the note of Arsenio as well, I think the track you're probably thinking of is What, the penultimate track on this record, which again, like kind of cute and little lyrical motif that Q uses here. Although he really leans into it to the point where it inevitably has some little comparisons that are insightful, I guess, and some that kind of just feel a bit like, okay, like what's a fat man without food in his gut? Okay, what is a child who doesn't know puberty? Okay. But compared to lines like, what is hip hop if it doesn't have violence? What is America without greed and glamour? What's Music Factory without Mr. Waltz? What's Duke Ellington without that swing? Like some clever kind of references and cultural points here, sandwiched in between lines like, what is a poet, all balls, no cock? And, it's fine. The other thing about the other thing about this track as well is that it's like I talked about Check the Rhyme being a little too sparse for my liking. This track is super sparse. And yeah, I think that kind of is there, I suppose, to showcase this steady flow that Q has and the fact that it is a sort of smaller moment on the record. But I don't know. It doesn't really do much for me. But, I will say for all of these songs that I've kind of nitpicked because of redundancy or just not a fully realized lyrical idea, they certainly don't detract from the atmosphere of this record. And they're certainly very easy to listen to. I would say maybe What does a little bit with that real sort of sparseness that it has. But still, they're decently of a piece with the rest of this album. And they're very easily forgivable when you consider its highs. And so I want to now talk about my two favorite songs in this record, and I'll save my absolute favorite for last, because fittingly it is, spoiler alert, the last song on this album. But the other one, we're going to get to Buster. Boy, oh boy, we're going to get to Buster. Oh boy. But first of all, jazz. We got the jazz. What a fucking classic song. I absolutely love this track.
Best beat on the album. Love it.
Totally a top 3. It's an absolutely smooth and sumptuous. It has one of the most truly immersive vibes of this whole record. I love that really warm little Rhodes piano and saxophone motif that's coming through in and out. But also I love, and this goes back to my comment on the rock steady drum break and show business. I love how fucking harsh the drums sound in We've Got Jazz. they're like distorted and like almost industrial sounding, and they're this really curious counterpoint against all of that warm little Rhodes and sax stuff that's happening. And just because of how fulsomely this is all mixed and put together, it really works. It doesn't feel jagged. It feels like just really invigorating, like your ears perk up every time it comes on, and it's so like immersively cool. And I think that Q is and Fife Dog are both excellent on this song. I think that they, again, their flows aren't exactly technical or amazing or staggering or stunning, but for 91, they're doing pretty good. And I think it's, again, another one of those sorts of mission statement sort of songs where you get like some of the braggadocio aspects of Q and Fife's rapping that they do lean into on certain parts of this record at its most, I think, entertaining and fun. So I am absolutely I love particularly just so many details, but I love when Q comes into his second verse in the song where he goes, "Hey, yo, but wait, back it up." He does this thing where he like stops the flow to like jump in, and it's like it's so fucking good. And
That's fantastic.
and there's a lot of like moments on this record where Q or Fife will just reference ass, and they'll use ass as a rhyming point of like, and just the way they say it always gets me.
On Scenario, when they talk about inflating an ass.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get to it. But
inflation fetish is ground zero.
Fuck. But yeah, we got the jazz. I'm sure. I mean, what do you guys think of this song?
It's like the Tribe song on this album. It's a fucking classic. It's I gotta say, I am totally with you on the two best songs on the album being Jazz We've Got and Scenario, but like there's just it's just the epitome of everything great about the album in one song. It's like, and even still, it's like there's a lot going on in the beat, but it's still so simple that it just feels so easy to like groove into. There's nothing like, everything about it is inviting and so like nocturnal. It just reminds me a lot of like, well, I mean, it reminds me a lot of the jazz that it samples. It reminds me a lot of like Roundabout Midnight or something, where it's just, it captures that so like early, like almost like early morning, late night time sort of underground, but still kind of like busy, like New York nightlife thing. It's I love it.
Yeah, it's just ridiculously beautiful and entertaining and fun. And this is neither here nor there, but when listening to verses from the Abstract this week, I realized that when Q does the Fife is in the house, Uncle Mike is in the house, it hit me that, and I don't know if this will mean anything to anyone because I might be the only person who's heard this, but there's a song on Daft Punk's first album called Teachers where they kind of pay tribute to all of their influences, and they do that by citing them by name and going, "Is in the house, yeah." Oh. And like, I just realized listening to it that it's a deliberate reference to, I think it's the deliberate reference to this song, which is a really cool piece of connection because Daft Punk, especially on Homework, are heavily indebted to hip hop production, hip hop sampling styles. Like that's where they cut their teeth. And so that's a cool example. I mean, you could probably, if you knew where to look, find millions of examples of little pieces of ephemera on this album bleeding through into later culture. It truly is one of the most influential hip hop records ever. And yeah, and that's just one example that occurred to me listening to it this week. But yeah, Scenario, the closing track on this record, the posse cut banger with that absolutely fucking timeless chorus. I mean, yeah, it's simple. It's obviously it's literally just here we go, yo, here we go, yo, but it's fucking great. Like it just the energy and character that it brings at this point in the record as well, it like gives you this final spark that really ends the record on a real high note, I think. And obviously this is a track that incorporates, again, it's a posse cut, incorporates features from the leaders of the new school, and despite including what I think is maybe that certainly one of the dumbest lines on this record, which is Fife's line, bust a nut in your eye to show you where I come from.
What a
Hell yeah.
what a testament to the world of hip hop to come.
Yeah, I mean that's Fife Dog in one lyric on this album here, and like I don't hate it, but I'm also just like, come on, dude, like come on. But yeah, he's like he really sets the tone of the energy. I think that's why it's a smart choice to give him the first verse, and then the other members of the new school as well, Charlie Brown and Dinko D, who I'm not as familiar with, but they bring really charismatic performances to the song, and I would say even a sheer silliness that feels so refreshing by the time that it hits on the record, like the wow, how now, brown cow. Like that always
he's just going stupid.
I just fucking lose it. Like the way in which they just kind of like they're literally just making sounds at certain points, like they cut up their own they chop up their own sentences
just musically posting
in real time. And it's fucking dope as shit. And yeah, I love that. And obviously the song is all about, this is the song that essentially made the career of Busta Rhymes, or at least kicked it to life, who gives, and my favorite verse on the whole album, frankly, but like it's certainly not the only strong, energetic, invigorating verse, but it's, I think, probably one of the most iconic in terms of like impact and significance and just a dizzying quality that I absolutely love. Like my favorite musical moment on this whole album is when his proper verse starts and Ali and Q know that they know to drop the drums out temporarily when he starts rapping, because you need to like be aware that this is happening. And then the beat comes back in and he just grabs you by the fucking throat. And I don't even know what the fuck this man is saying, but he has such an energy to him that unlike with other rappers who might not have that level, where you would maybe be more critical of them if you didn't understand what they were doing, I am totally with Busta the whole way. Like I mean, there are points where he's just grunting in this verse, and it's fucking the best grunting that you could hear on a hip hop record. I mean, literally, when he's like chickadee Jocko, the chocolate chicken, which
I'm like, that's again, goddamn right.
Again, I now realize that Bare Naked Ladies, Chickadee China, the Chinese chicken in one week is a reference to this, which I didn't know until now. And then following it with the rare cock-a-diesel butt cheeks they were kicking, like whatever it is, that sounds like a good time. Yeah.
Hell yeah, man. I want to be there.
So yeah, that is an amazing ending to this record. I fucking adore it. One of my favorite Tribe songs.
Yeah, it's great. I'd pose a bit of a counter to Tyler. I will say I do think there are some moments at the start that, like, the complaint of Tyler's that I definitely share is that there's some that feel thematically repetitious. And, you know, I still enjoy the songs that are a bit redundant. I don't want them gone. But at the same time, I would have appreciated a little bit more variety, just because, you know, I just would have. That said, though, everything after the infamous date rape, the sort of second half of the album, I know Tyler doesn't agree with Check the Rhyme, but for me, Check the Rhyme through Scenario is just a fucking undefeated run. Yes, including both Sky Pager and What. I don't know, man. Sky Pager's got a beat that goes really, really hard, and I really just love how minimal What is up until the very end, so you can get the what really, really loud. I almost like treat that kind of like a little bit of an interlude, TBH, just because it's like slowly, and it's fine. But like that part of the album is just the one where I'm just the most in it. And, you know, of course, we've got stuff like Everything Is Fair and Jazz We've Got, which I think are probably the two best written songs on the album. Like they're the most, like the songs with the most to say. And yeah, I just think it's, if anything, my hot take on the album is, it's, you know, not that it's not like the best or anything. It's just that, like, it's not even that, like, I don't understand thinking that this is the best Tribe album. I definitely can see where people are coming from there. It is a classic, deservedly. It's why we're talking about it. But just when you consider the totality of what Tribe were and what they contributed and what they accomplished with their music, I just don't really understand how, if you love the following albums, you can say that they're not a little bit better than this. Like, I maybe the fundamentals are just a little bit more solid, or the songs are just a little bit more classic. But to me, it's like the albums after this are great because this album is great, and they built from it. And I don't think they didn't do anything that was unsuccessful. They didn't do anything artistically that was a regression, other than the album before the hiatus, which like basically was mid because it was a regression. But everything after this, Beats, Rhymes, Midnight Marauders, it feels a bit more like that they needed a foundation to be built upon, and this was it. And it's why this album is important, is that it's simultaneously like, it is a great album, but I also believe it was just the template for even better music to come.
Yeah, and I guess if I were to wrap it up, I'd say, like, reflecting on hip hop in '91, we've talked about those two titans, and I think that regardless of where you fall on either of them, I mean, what I love the most about them as a duo, De La Soul and Tribe Called Quest, is that they offer entirely unique appeals, and they offer entirely unique things from each other. And to a certain extent, where they're like, one is almost the yin to the other's yang, and you get between the two of them really diverse and clear and fascinating pictures of where this particular niche of hip hop in the East Coast was at this specific juncture of history. And so I think if you're to understand either of these albums, you kind of need to know them both to know what one is doing in relation to the other, especially because these two groups are heavily informed by each other. And so I think between the two of them, you get this really cool picture of 91 hip hop. And depending on your feelings on these two records, you get to know a little bit more about what you appreciate and value in hip hop in this time. It's like these two records and this just hip hop in general in 91, to just make this more, I guess, into the retrospective, is not just cool because of all these different innovative and influential things that were happening that were demonstrating new possibilities and futures, but also because that diversity allows you to get a greater understanding of what it is that you love and what it is that you might love and what it is that, about this whole world that you connect with. And so you can't talk about one without talking about the other, and it wouldn't be fair. And so I'm glad that we've ended up talking about these records in the context of this retrospective, where we have these two things together to in the same sort of place. And yeah, I think that everyone should hear both of them and figure out for themselves where they sit and what sort of I guess their particular tastes or personalities, and with regard to these kinds of sides of this sphere, say about you as a person and as a music fan. And we'd love to hear from our listeners as well about what you think of this record and the De La record and just hip hop in general in this time, and Tribe, what your favorite Tribe records and moments and feelings on this record and others are. Obviously, let us know in the comments as well.
And if I can close out just a tiny little bit, is that, once again, I am referencing Mike the Snare. He has a great video discussing the records of the Tribe Called Quest. And there's a segment there at the very end that he's got that I think really lets you grasp the totality of just how important even like a relatively simple album like this was, where it's basically just every single contemporary hip hop artist that's big right now. People like Kanye saying shit like, if you get mad at me, then blame Q-Tip and Fife Dog because they raised me. And it's just like this, like in the most literal of terms, was the blueprint for everything that followed it for 30 fucking years. It's easily one of the most important albums we talked about for the retrospective. Hell, I think there's a that it even might be the most important in a very weird way, even though it's not like, the most innovative or the most complex, but like it had a lasting impact that to this very day is still felt.
Yeah, and if you were to envision like popular culture at this time as these kind of distinct worlds of rock and hip hop that might eventually grow closer together, then it becomes even more cosmically significant that Nevermind and the Low End Theory happened on the exact same day, because
They have a lot in common.
Because those records are, for those specific really broad niches, the same sort of thing. They represent the same sort of thing in a broad way anyway. Okay. Favorite tracks and ratings for the Low End Theory. Reverse order, I guess, since that is what's next. My 3 favorite tracks on this record are Scenario, Jazz We've Got, and I'll say Verses from the Abstract. My least favorite track on this record is, the infamous Date Rape. And I'm going to give this a 7.
My 3 favorites are, I'm going to say Excursions, Scenario, and Bugging Out. Least favorite is, I also have to go with Infamous Date Rape. It's the only thing resembling a miss on here for me. Just ill-advised. And I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10.
Alrighty. August.
My 3 favorite tracks are Excursions, Verses from the Abstract, which I didn't say much on, or any of these songs for that matter, but that's okay. And Jazz We've Got. Least favorite is The Infamous Date Rape, and I'm giving it a 7 out of 10.
Well, I mean, to just get it out of the way, my least favorite is also my 3 favorites, on the other hand, are Jazz We've Got, Scenario, and such a great opening 1-2 punch. I'll say Bugging Out's my slightly preferred track, I'll say. And I give the album an 8 out of 10.
Okay, that gives us an average of 7.8. And what average did? Oh, that's so interesting. De La Soul is Dead got a 7.9 average. That's very interesting to me. Indeed. Although I will say that if Saoirse were still here, she'd probably give it at least an 8, which would probably bump it. So that's probably worth keeping in mind. But anyway, as I said before, let us know what you think of this record in the comments below. Obviously, we welcome addressings of our criticisms. Next week in the retrospective, I believe we are covering the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Blood, Sugar, Sex, Magik, the other huge album of the 24th of September, 1991. So you can look forward to that.
Threaten me with a good time, Mr. Chili Peppers.
Oh, I mean, we're
Blood, Sugar, Sex, and Magic?
Well,
I barely know her.
That's gonna be a conversation and a half. Jesus. And make sure you check out our other videos that have come out this week. We did a thing on Toby Max. Welcome to Diversity.
So I did a thing.
And it's something that we needed to do for us. Although Morgan might disagree with that statement.
It's just,
But anyway, it exists now.
We've covered 2 very important hip hop records this week.
Shut up. Shut up.
It exists. It exists now. So check it out if you want to see us have a fucking total psychological fucking episode. And we also did a main episode this week on Sufjan Stevens and Angelo De Augustine's new album, A Beginner's Mind, and Poppy's new album, Flux. So make sure you go and check that out as well. And as always, it remains to August to send us home.
Rock over London, rock on Chicago. Ferrari, we are the competition.